All right, moving on to our next speaker, who is going to talk to us today about clinical trials. I would like to welcome Amin Yakubov, who is the program coordinator at Bellevue Hospital Center, Perlmutter Cancer Center Clinical Trials Office. You can use the arrows right there.
Okay, thanks. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Just with a raise of hands, how many people have heard of or know about clinical trials? Oh, good. That's good. So my name is Amin Yakubov, and I work for the NYU Cancer Center specifically for the conduct of clinical trials at Bellevue. And today I'm going to talk to you about clinical trials. So what are clinical trials? So they're basically research studies that people volunteer to be a part of to test new drugs, devices, or methods. Physicians and scientists need them to learn whether a new treatment works and if a treatment is safe for their patients. All of these new treatments must go through clinical trials before being approved by the FDA and becoming a standard of care. What do we learn from clinical trials? The two most important things that we learn from clinical trials are they safe and are they effective? We try to answer the question by asking, is the treatment safe? Of course, all treatments come with a risk, but the most important part of is, are the benefits outweighing the risks? And that's a very important question that we ask with clinical trials. The other part is the efficacy. Does the treatment actually work in humans? We ask questions, how does it work? Is it more effective than the actual standard treatment? Does it yield better results than standard treatment? And is it effective in some populations and not effective in others? So how are clinical trials conducted? So it takes a few years for a clinical trial to go from start to end and becoming FDA approved. So we first start with laboratory studies, and then that usually takes approximately 6 years. And during that duration, we're testing particular devices or drugs in the laboratory. We're testing them in cell cultures, we're testing them in animal studies, and we really want to see if the new drug that we have or the new compounds that we've created in the lab, are they working on that level? Are they working on the disease level in the cells? Are they working in the mouse models? And then we begin our clinical trials in humans with the various phases. We start everything from phase 1 and go all the way to phase 4. In phase 1, we're trying to really test the new compound that we've developed, the new drug, in a few individuals, and we're truly trying to see if it's safe to even give to humans. And that allows us to just test it out on a few individuals. And as we go through the various phases of the clinical trial, phase 2 and 3, we expand those cohorts and we give it to a larger population. And we're trying to see, are those particular compounds and drugs safe in a more larger scale to the larger population. And then we're also in those phases seeing if it's better and more effective than standard treatment. And then when we go to phase 4, we're doing open market where we're giving it to nationally, we're giving it internationally, and there's just thousands of people that participate in that phase. And from there, we go into the FDA approval for the drug to be approved as standard of care. So how do we ensure safety? At the NYU Cancer Center, there's a few ways that we ensure that there's safe conduct of clinical trials. The first thing is that we have the protocol review and monitoring system, and that's mandated by the National Cancer Institute. And since we're designated as a National Cancer Institute site, we need to have a protocol review and monitoring system in place. It's a committee of peers qualified to review and assess a study plan. And that committee of peers is our scientists, physicians, statisticians that review the protocol to make sure that the clinical trial that we're offering is scientifically sound and medically sound as well. They also review these protocols on an annual basis. The statisticians on the committee are trying to evaluate if the number of people that we're actually enrolling, what is the least amount of people that we could enroll to answer that question and to provide the least risk to the general population. The next way that we ensure safety is by having the DSMC, which is the Data Safety and Monitoring Committee. And every clinical trial is required to have this kind of plan. And it's a committee of members, once again, of physicians and statisticians in place that evaluate every single visit to the clinical trial that occurs, and they evaluate more specifically the proper conduct and the side effects that are occurring during the clinical trial. And they track these side effects as they happen through the process. And if they see that those side effects are creating more risk, they may close down the study. If they see they're okay as per drug, they will continue monitoring those side effects. And this plan and committee has to be approved by the FDA, a scientific committee, and also ethical board. Lastly, and one of the most important committees that we have at NYU is the Institutional Review Board. A lot of institutions have this as well. It's not only for clinical trials, but every research that's conducted at NYU goes through an IRB approval. It's a board of qualified members. It's made up of physicians, scientists, statisticians, but also community members. And they're trying to make sure that the protocols that we provide to the populations are safe, they're effective, and they're going to provide that we're answering the particular hypotheses that we pose. They also have community members to ensure that it's safe for the community and that all community members have equal access to the trial as well. Every amendment and change that we do for the clinical trial is submitted to the IRB. It's reviewed annually, and any event that ever occurs on a clinical trial to an individual is reported to this board as well. One of their main focuses, they have three main focuses. They look at the benefits. Do the benefits actually outweigh the risk of the clinical trial? They are concerned for respect of persons. Does any individual that actually go on the clinical trial understand fully the trial that they're given and the research that they're participating in? And lastly, justice is one of their most important as well. They ensure that clinical trials are provided to anyone and everyone that is eligible to a clinical trial, and that no person is ever denied. So why do clinical trials take so long? I know I showed a chart before of clinical trials taking so long to take. So there are many barriers, and there's a lot of research on the actual barriers. Sometimes the barriers are physical. Sometimes the barriers is of individuals not even knowing clinical trials. However, we know that the data shows that around 5% of adults who have cancer actually participate in clinical trials. And when we talk about certain groups and populations, such as minorities, that number goes even lower than 5%. And especially in women of color, that number is even lower than, sometimes it hovers around 3%. So we're always concerned about those barriers, because we want to make sure that clinical trials are offered to every individual who has that option to get a clinical trial. One of the biggest barriers is that patients don't know that clinical trials exist to them. They don't know that clinical trials exist in their institution. They don't know that clinical trials may exist in their cities with the various institutions. There's always a discomfort with a patient thinking they're a volunteer, and there's this complex called the guinea pig complex, where they think they're being tested on. And patients worry about harm of unproven treatment given to them. There's also clinical trials also have very stringent eligibility criteria, because we're trying to test out particular devices or drugs on specific diseases. We want to really ensure that specific populations and groups of people really are aligned with what we're trying to test. And lastly, the cost. The cost of conducting clinical trials are very expensive. Recruiting individuals, conduct of clinical trials, it all requires a lot of money by the institutions. Some terminology to know when thinking about volunteering for a clinical trial. So if you ever come in contact with clinical trial or a research team, they'll use a few of this, jargons. One of the words that we always use is randomization, which is a random assignment to either a treatment group. So the clinical trial will have a treatment group or a control group, and it's like a flip of a coin. And the treatment group is usually the investigational arm, and the control group could be standard of care treatment that we already know may work, that works, and then or a placebo, which is an active drug. Another a few words that we use is blind and double blind. And blinded studies are when the patient does not know which arm they're on, either on control or a new treatment. And double-blind is when the patient nor physician know which treatment is being used. And it allows us to remove some of the bias in actually reporting the outcomes. So the NYU has a lot of different trials open at the NYU Cancer Center. However, we also provide specific trials from NYU at Bellevue for the breast population. And we ensure that by ensuring that we try to say that we're trying to provide breast trials to all populations, not only at NYU, but also at Bellevue. We have 6 trials currently for our breast portfolio, and that includes pre-surgical, adjuvant treatments, radiation, and for individuals who have metastatic breast cancer. And we're trying to provide clinical trials at the various life cycles of breast cancer. There are currently at the NYU Perlmutter Cancer Center, there are 120 clinical trials ongoing at any given time, and that number is always growing with new and new trials opening. Of those 120, 22 are dedicated to breast cancer diseases. They're available at the NYU Cancer Center, the Bellevue Hospital, Arena Oncology on Long Island, and we're opening more at NYU Winthrop on Long Island, NYU Brooklyn, and the VA in the future. One of the best resources when you want to look up clinical trials is the clinicaltrials.gov website. And it's an incredible resource because even sometimes I use that website. It allows you to really look up clinical trials anywhere in the country or sometimes around the world. It's very easy to use. You just type in, for example, breast cancer, and you could identify the types of clinical trials that are available in your city, and they're listed by institution, and you could also contact the particular research teams that are conducting these trials. Another great resource is the NYU website for clinical trials. That's a great resource as well. It's a very similar platform where you could type in, for example, breast cancer and identify the various trials that are available at NYU. Another great way to really understand or be involved in clinical trials is always asking your physician. And by asking your physicians, you are asking for not only standard of care treatment, but you're asking for any other options that may be available. And I think that's one of the most important things. When being diagnosed with breast cancer, you should always talk about your options, may it be at diagnosis, during treatment, or after treatment, because clinical trials and standard of care treatments are available throughout the life cycle of the treatment and disease. And one of my favorite quotes, I like to use this a lot, is the greatest gift you could give your family and the world is a healthy you. So I feel like it's important to empower yourself and truly understand that even if you're diagnosed with breast cancer, try to understand that there are options available at all settings and at institutions here as well, and to live a healthy lifestyle. Thank you.